19-year-old Richard was working part-time at Amazon in Tennessee when he saw a man struggling with his bags in the parking lot. The man, wearing a plain white shirt and jeans, looked like just another customer. But Richard had no idea that this was actually Shaquille O'Neal. Without thinking twice, Richard rushed over to help, stepping away from his post for a few minutes. But his manager didn't see it as an act of kindness. Instead, she saw it as breaking the rules and decided it was enough to fire him on the spot. But the very next day, Richard got a surprise visitor at his door. It was Shaquille O'Neal himself, and what happened next would change Richard's life forever. It was a Tuesday afternoon around 4:17 p.m. when Richard started his shift at Amazon. The sun was shining brightly, making the parking lot warm, but Richard barely noticed. He was busy organizing carts near the entrance when something caught his eye. A man in a white polo shirt and jeans was struggling to load his groceries into his car. Without a second thought, Richard left the carts and jogged over to help. "Let me help you with that," he said with a friendly smile. The man hesitated for a second, then nodded. Richard quickly grabbed the bags and placed them carefully in the trunk while chatting casually. To Richard, it was just a small act of kindness. What he didn't realize was that the man he was helping was actually Shaquille O'Neal. Dressed simply, Shaq blended in with the crowd. When Richard finished, Shaq reached out holding a crisp bill. "Thanks, young man. This means a lot." Richard smiled and shook his head. "No need, sir. I'm just glad I could help." Feeling good about his small good deed, Richard turned back toward the store, only to find his manager, Shirley, standing at the entrance with her arms crossed and a deep frown on her face. Even though Richard had helped someone in need, Shirley didn't care. She wasn't interested in his explanation. "I'm going to have to let you go, Richard," she said, her voice flat and final. Richard's heart sank. Fired? For helping someone? It didn't make sense. He opened his mouth to explain, but before he could say anything, Shirley cut him off. "No excuses, you're done here." Richard packed his things, his mind spinning. He couldn't believe it. Fired for being kind. His coworkers, including his friend Charles, were shocked. "What a jerk," Margaret muttered, giving Richard a hug. "You'll find something better." Even though her words were comforting, Richard couldn't shake the feeling that this was unfair. Why was he being punished for doing the right thing? As he walked away from Amazon, he felt lost. How was he going to explain this to his parents? They had been so proud of him for getting the job in the first place. When he walked through the door at home, his mother was the first to notice. "You're home early," she said, her voice full of surprise. Richard's disappointment must have been obvious because her smile faded. "What's wrong?" she asked, walking toward him. He sighed and hugged her. "I got fired," he muttered, avoiding her eyes. "I helped someone and the manager didn't like it." His mother's face hardened. "What do you mean, help someone?" Richard's voice was shaky as he explained what had happened, how he had helped the man in the parking lot, how the man was struggling, and how he had just wanted to make sure he was okay. His mother was furious. "I'm calling that store and talking to the owner," she said, reaching for the phone. But Richard stopped her. "No, Mom, let it go. I don't want to make it worse." Instead, he went to his room, lay on his bed, and stared at the ceiling. The hours dragged on as he tried to figure out what to do next. The disappointment felt heavy. He had wanted to prove he could handle things on his own, but now it felt like everything was falling apart. At dinner, his dad tried to lighten the mood. "I spoke with a friend today," he said, glancing at Richard. "He owns a garage and might have some work for you if you're interested." Richard appreciated the effort, but he wanted a job he had earned himself, not one his parents had set up for him. Not wanting to sound ungrateful, he thanked his dad and promised to think about it. His father patted his hand across the table, understanding that Richard needed time to process everything. They ate in silence, the air thick with unspoken thoughts. The next morning, as Richard tried to shake off his disappointment, the doorbell rang. The sound snapped him out of his thoughts. He wasn't expecting anyone. Who could it be? Richard rushed to the door, still groggy from sleep, his heart pounding. As he opened it, he squinted against the bright morning light. A large black car was parked outside. In front of it stood a man, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark suit and wearing sunglasses. He looked like someone straight out of a movie. "Are you Richard?" the man asked in a deep, serious voice. Richard blinked, trying to make sense of what was happening. Yeah, who are you?" The man didn't answer. "You need to come with me," he said, turning toward the car without waiting for a response. Richard froze, uncertainty rushing through him. What was going on? Who was this man? What did he want? But as the man moved toward the car, something inside Richard shifted. It felt like there was no way to say no, no way to escape this moment. He followed. The passenger door opened and he hesitated, glancing back at his house. But his gut told him this was something he couldn't avoid. The man in the suit wasn't giving him a choice. Richard slid into the car, and as soon as he did, the door slammed shut. The locks clicked into place. The windows were so darkly tinted that Richard could barely see outside. The car was fancy, but the two men in the front seat made it feel anything but comfortable. His stomach twisted as the car pulled away from the curb. His thoughts raced, but he was too nervous to speak. After a few minutes of silence, Richard couldn't take it anymore. "Where are we going?" he asked, his voice shaky. The man in the passenger seat glanced at him through the rearview mirror but didn't say a word. Richard felt the tension growing. He tried again. "Why are you here? What do you want with me?" Still, no answer. Richard looked at the driver, but his eyes stayed fixed on the road. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the steady hum of the engine. Where were they taking him? What was happening? After what felt like hours, the car finally slowed, the tires crunching over gravel. Richard's stomach knotted as they veered off the main road onto a narrow, empty path. The city streets faded behind them, replaced by a lonely stretch of road ahead. "We'll be there soon," the man in the passenger seat said, his tone flat. Richard slumped back in his seat, feeling more trapped than ever. There was no turning back now. He was caught in something he didn't understand, something he couldn't escape. Then, just when things couldn't get stranger, a crackling voice came through the car's speaker. "Have you succeeded?" the voice asked, cold and firm. The man in the passenger seat looked at a device on the dashboard before answering. "Yes, he's with us now." Richard's heart pounded. This confirmed his worst fear. They were after him, but why? What had he done? The passenger nodded, ending the conversation. The car kept moving, winding down the dark road, and Richard had no idea where this strange journey would lead. All he could do was wait as uncertainty gnawed at him. When the car finally stopped, Richard's unease deepened. They had arrived at what looked like a private harbor. A sleek modern boat rocked gently at the edge of the dock, its engine humming softly. Moonlight shimmered on the water, casting an eerie glow over the scene. The driver stepped out first, then turned to Richard, gesturing for him to follow. "Why are we here?" Richard asked, his voice tight with fear. The driver didn't answer. Instead, he opened the car door and motioned for Richard to step out. Richard hesitated, his grip tightening on the metal rod hidden under his jacket. But he obeyed. His eyes stayed on the water. The vast ocean stretched out in front of him, giving no hint of where they were going. "This way," the driver said shortly. His tone made it clear, no questions allowed. Richard walked slowly, carefully following the driver to the boat. The driver climbed aboard without a second thought, taking a seat near the controls. Another man, probably the captain, started the engine. Richard's heart pounded as the boat pulled away, the shore growing smaller behind them. The silence was heavy, broken only by the steady hum of the engine and the soft splash of waves against the boat. He glanced at the driver, whose face was unreadable behind dark sunglasses that reflected the moonlight. "Where are we going?" Richard asked, his voice louder now, edged with desperation. The driver ignored him. Richard's mind raced. He wasn't a hero. He didn't know how to fight. If things went wrong, he wasn't sure he could protect himself. The rod under his jacket felt heavier than before, a reminder of his fear and how few choices he had left. After what felt like hours, a small island appeared in the distance. Jagged cliffs rose from the sea like silent guards. Richard's stomach twisted as they got closer. The island looked abandoned, the kind of place where secrets stayed hidden forever. The boat slowed, the captain steering it neatly alongside a wooden dock. Richard spotted a lone house and a large shed tucked into the thick trees. The air was too still, like the island itself was waiting for something. "Get off," the driver ordered, his voice flat. Richard hesitated. His feet felt glued to the deck, but the driver's cold stare left him no choice. Taking a deep breath, he stepped off the boat. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. The driver followed, his tall frame casting a long shadow in the moonlight. Behind them, the boat was already pulling away, its engine growing quieter in the distance. Panic rose in Richard's chest. There was no way back now. "Where are we?" Richard demanded, his voice unsteady but firm. "Follow me," the driver said without turning around. Richard's frustration boiled over. "You've been dragging me around all day. I deserve answers." The driver paused, tilting his head slightly. "You'll get your answers. In time." Richard clenched his teeth, knowing arguing wouldn't help. He gripped the rod tighter under his jacket and followed the driver toward the house. The silence was overwhelming, broken only by the sound of their footsteps on the wooden dock. Then, just as they reached the house, a voice called from behind. "Richard." That single word made him freeze. It was a voice he knew, a voice he never thought he'd hear again. His heart pounded as he spun around. There he was. Shaquille O'Neal? The man Richard had helped just days ago stood at the edge of the dock, leaning on a crutch. But this wasn't the weak, quiet figure he remembered. This was Shaquille O'Neal, one of the most powerful men in the world, and he was looking right at Richard. "You didn't think I'd forget your help, did you?" Shaquille said, a small smile on his face. Richard's mind raced. How? Why? Shaquille's expression softened. "You didn't know it at the time," he said, his voice calm. "But I've been watching. That day at the store when you helped me with those bags, I wasn't just some random guy. I had a plan, and the moment you showed kindness, you became part of it." Richard was more confused than ever. A plan? What kind of plan? Shaquille's smile faded. His face turned serious. "A plan to offer you something bigger than you could imagine. A second chance. But only if you can handle what's coming next." Richard's stomach tightened. "What's coming next?" "What do you want from me?" Shaquille gestured toward the house. "Come inside, we have a lot to talk about." Richard hesitated. His instincts told him to run, but the boat was gone, and the driver stood in his only escape path. He had no choice. As he stepped inside, his breath caught. The house wasn't what he expected. It was sleek, almost futuristic. Walls were lined with high-tech gadgets. Screens displayed streams of data, images of people, and maps of the world. "What is this place?" Richard whispered. Shaquille didn't answer right away. He walked over to one of the screens and tapped a few buttons. A glowing map of the world appeared. "This," Shaquille said with purpose, "is the world I'm building, and you're going to help me shape it." Richard blinked. "Help you? How? I don't even know what's going on." Shaquille turned to face him, his gaze sharp. "I see something in you, Richard. Something rare. You help people without expecting anything in return. You stand your ground when it matters. That's why you're here." He paused, letting the words sink in. "This is your chance to be part of something bigger. To change the world." Richard's head spun. Fired from Amazon for helping someone, now standing in front of Shaquille O'Neal, being told he could change the world? It didn't make sense. "But why me?" he asked. Shaquille's expression softened. "Because you see the truth. In a world where most people look the other way, you take action. That's the kind of person we need. It won't be easy, but you can do it. Richard's heart pounded. His life had been a series of small, ordinary moments. Now he was being offered a chance to matter. What do I have to do? Shaquille smiled, a hint of approval in his eyes. You'll learn everything you need to know. Together, we'll build something incredible. And just like that, Richard's life changed forever. As the first day of his new life began, he knew one thing for sure: there was no turning back. Do you think Richard ever imagined his life could change so much in just 48 hours? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.